started. Welcome to the third hearing of the Select Committee of California-Mexico Binational Affairs. I'm honored that my colleagues are able to join us, and we are very honored to have the Speaker of the Assembly, Mr. John Perez, here. We have members with us, Michael Allen from the 7th District, Luis Alejo from the 28th District, Roger Hernandez from the 57th District, Ricardo Lara from the 50th District, and I understand V. Manny Perez is on his way. He's representing the 80th District. And our goals today and the goals of this committee are to make efforts to build a better relationship with Mexico and gain a better understanding of how we can work together to enhance our economies in our respective communities. A delegation led by Speaker Perez had the opportunity to visit Mexico City, and I was thankful to be on that delegation, and met with Presidente Felipe Calderon and some of our legislative counterparts. I would like to invite Speaker Perez to share with us what we learned during our visit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. As you've heard, this past September, I was pleased to lead a bipartisan delegation of members of the Assembly on the first formal visit to Mexico by California officials in several years. In addition to our chair, Mr. Hueso, we were also joined by Assembly members Nathan Fletcher, Nancy Skinner, and Ricardo Lara on this important delegation visit to Mexico. Mexico is certainly one of California's most important neighbors and economic partners. And as we all know, the ties of commerce, history, and culture between Mexico and California are strong, and the potential benefits of strengthening those ties are even stronger. Throughout our visit, we had the opportunity to have frank and productive conversations with Mexican officials from the federal district to the federal houses of both houses of their federal government, the diplomatic corps, and including the President of the Republic himself. And we also spent time meeting with educational and business leaders, both from Mexico and in California. And with respect to that latter discussion, we had a very frank discussion on ways in which we could strengthen the economic and commercial links that exist between California and Mexico. Among the major themes that emerged on the delegation's visit were the following: the importance of a continued dialogue, engagement, and sharing of best practices on issues ranging from immigration to education, health, the environment, economic development, and with respect to economic development, particularly discussions around economic development in the border region. The importance of educational partnership and exchange in maintaining and building a strong and meaningful bilateral relationship, and the need for a stronger physical presence for California in Mexico to produce and promote greater trade and educational partnerships. One issue in particular that I have been pleased to be working on is ensuring that UC's physical presence through the Casa de California is maintained, and to ensure that UC and CSU and private universities in California continue to have vibrant study abroad programs in Mexico. I've spoken with the Chancellor of the CSU system and the President of the UC system, respectively, to encourage them to keep these programs and expand them. And these educational programs are a vital link between California and Mexico, and ensuring their maintenance ensures that today's students who are planning to become tomorrow's business people and civic leaders have a good understanding of our largest trade partners, so that they in turn can create jobs both in Mexico and in California. With respect to the Mexican government officials, we had a number of productive meetings. Of course, most significant was being received by the President of Mexico himself, both at the presidential residence and then at the ceremonial presidential palace as we marked the independence of the country. We also met with our counterparts in the Federal District of Mexico City, which, like California, enjoys a reputation for being on the cutting edge of progress. One such example is Mexico City has done a phenomenal job in building and promoting public transit to ensure that its working men and women have a reliable means of transportation, while at the same time laying the foundation for building a healthier, more sustainable, and more prosperous economy. This was one of the more interesting ones because as we look at public transportation and the health benefits of decreased greenhouse gas emissions, that is a key element. But they took it a step further, and they created clinics within their transit system where people could access healthcare professionals for diagnostic interventions, which is a very, very forward-thinking approach to ways in which you can take advantage of other benefits of investing in public transit and having it have secondary benefits that clearly outweigh the primary benefit that we tend to focus on. I was very pleased with the tenor and the quality of discussions that we had with our colleagues in Mexico, and I believe that they'll be helpful as this committee studies ways to continue to build on our already strong ties with the culture and commerce and history that binds our state with our partners in Mexico. One last thing. We as Californians look forward to the opportunity later in this year to host the Binational Legislators Conference. And I think it'll provide a good opportunity for us to build on the discussion of best practices, much in the way that a recent trip by several members of this committee in the last month has built on the trip that we had in September. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to fill people in on our trip, and thank you for your ongoing leadership on this, especially with respect to questions of commerce and goods and people movement that are so vibrant to our future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for being here. And you know, in a time of austerity, when we really cannot finance the level of outreach that we need to make into Mexico, really to solve a lot of these issues, we as the legislators are taking on that role to become the ambassadors of the state of California. And I just wanted to thank you for your involvement in that. And you were an amazing ambassador to the state of California on that trip. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Lara.
Thank you, Chairman. I also want to echo and say that the delegation was very fruitful. And Mr. Speaker, you did a phenomenal job of representing not only us in the Assembly, but in the California legislature. I think we should be very proud of the work that we did and your staff work and under your leadership. I think it was a phenomenal trip, not only economically wise, but it really set the tone for future dialogue between California and Mexico. And I just want to reiterate how proud I was to not only be part of the delegation, but of your leadership and your desire to continue to open that dialogue between Mexico and California. Thank you.
Thank you. So as the Speaker mentioned, we have addressed significantly important subjects during our visit, and I am planning to incorporate those important discussions into this committee's agenda in the upcoming year. Discussion topics will include strengthening the commercial and trade ties between Mexico and California, and making a commitment to reducing greenhouse gases in Mexico and California, and improving public health and strengthening education partnerships. And those are some of the issues that he addressed in his comments. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Mexico Consul General in Sacramento, Carlos Gonzalez Gutierrez. Thank you, for being here. And Normando Novello Bonifaz of Poro Turismo Ensenada. He's also the owner of Estero Beach Hotel in South Ensenada. Thank you for being here. Gracias por su participación y su presencia. Thanks for coming all the way from Ensenada to be here with us today. The purpose of this meeting will be to continue the conversation we had in our second committee hearing and the issues regarding border infrastructure and transportation. We iterated the fact that California is considered the front door of our state's economy, and having an efficient border crossing is key to enabling economic development. As a result of these discussions, business and local border leaders have called for more resources to reduce border wait times, and we'll be discussing a technology idea today that would expedite processing and secure our borders, or at least expedite processing without necessarily reducing security in our borders. We will first get an update on business and tourism. We will have presentations from each panel, followed by an opportunity for member questions and discussion at each panel. The overall goal is to get inputs from both communities on each side of the border in order to really come up with a good representation of how we can solve our common challenges and create really a binational atmosphere. This committee often strives to have viewpoints from both sides of the border, so I want to thank the representatives of Mexico that are here to provide their perspective. In our first panel, we'll get an update from Jason Wells, who is the Executive Director of the San Isidro Chamber of Commerce and also the Chair to the Smart Border Coalition, to tell us how California has been impacted by the increase in border wait times. Welcome, Jason. Thank you for being here. Thanks for coming all the way from San Diego to be with us today. You have 10 minutes for your presentation, and if you, while you're getting set, does anybody have any comments they'd like to make? Okay. Go ahead and begin when you're ready, Mr. Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Assembly members. As was said, my name is Jason Wells. I'm Executive Director of the San Isidro Chamber of Commerce, and it really is an honor and a privilege to address the Select Committee on California-Mexico Binational Affairs, and I especially thank the Chairman for the invite to come this afternoon. In 2007, at the request of several of our representatives, like then Council Member Hueso, the most influential nonprofits in South San Diego established the San Isidro Smart Border Coalition. It's a unified voice for the nation's most important border crossing with the mission. I'm sorry, this is on the. There we go. With the mission to represent the needs of affected stakeholders as we fervently advocate for efficient border inspections, expedient border crossings, and implementation of proper infrastructure to catalyze the social, commercial, and economic growth of the great Baja California region. The chairman asked me to come today and speak to you about Mexico's impact on California, both in an economic sense. I've added in a little bit of a social sense in the discussions that you're going to have today with newer technologies. The San Isidro Port of Entry is the busiest land border crossing in the world. There's 140,000 people that cross every day. This is equivalent to the entire city of Sunnyvale picking up and leaving every single day. Otay Mesa, there you go. Otay Mesa is the main commercial gateway for the international trade between California and Mexico. It's the second largest cargo crossing between the U.S. and Mexico. And Tecate is a small but tourist-rich crossing at the eastern portion of San Diego County. In fact, 1 out of every 5 people entering the United States of America come through California's ports of entry. That's Ellis Island, Florida, you have it. 1 out of every 5 people that come into our country come through California. In a social context, Mexico, as the speaker had mentioned, is not only California's closest international neighbor, but it's also the ethnic origin of 31% of Californians. That means there are 14 million Californians with families, friends, or cultural ties to Mexico. And who's coming from Mexico? These are people who work in California, pay taxes in California, shop in California, or go to private schools in California. And how do we treat them? This line, it's a little hard to see, but if you're looking at the bottom right-hand corner, that's kind of the beginning of the line. It curves back up north, and then goes back down into the building. It's actually quite astonishing. But, of course, this is all for good cause, because we're stopping the terrorists. Now, I'm being facetious, but the reality is 97% of the people crossing our border look like that child. They're people that come 3 or more times a week. They know the CBP officers better than they know some of their coworkers. You add to that the 87,000 people crossings in Otay Mesa, Tecate, and Andrade, and you have over 175,000 people every day of every month of every year benefiting the state of California and needing a more efficient way to cross. In regards to Mexico's economic impact, Mexico is California's #1 trading partner, generating over $3 billion to the San Diego regional economy alone. There's $32 billion in goods traded between California and Mexico every year. And $21 billion of that are exports from California to Mexico, representing 15% of all California exports. Of course, San Isidro, where cargo is not crossed, hundreds of thousands of jobs are supported by workers living in one country and working in another. Businessmen like myself going to meetings from on one side of the border to the other side, and tourists, which you'll hear about shortly, from the Honorable Juan Tintos. San Isidro, actually handling more than 60 million people a year, handles more passengers than LAX. Now, as you saw with the line, there's a wait time to get across that border. How does that affect us? Updating the San Diego Association of Governments 2007 border wait time study, the state of California is currently losing over $4 billion every year and losing thousands of jobs per year due to these wait times. The actual updated figure is closer to 62,000 jobs per year that are being lost due to inefficient inspections at the border. Again, let me repeat. We're losing $4 billion a year and 62,000 jobs a year at a time when we're trying to move mountains to find jobs and find economic opportunity. The San Isidro Smart Border Coalition certainly thanks you for your consideration of this topic. We offer our unconditional support to the efforts of the Select Committee on California-Mexico Binational Affairs, and we strongly support enhanced driver's license as an important tool in our battle to save the over $4 billion and 62,000 jobs that are being lost each year. These losses, incidentally, are the equivalent of losing the economic benefit of hosting 18 Super Bowls every year. In places like San Isidro, not knowing when your customers or your managers or your clients or your employees will be able to arrive to work causes the loss of the equivalent of 4 Google companies that's leaving town every year. There's not a mayor in California that wouldn't fight to the end to keep a Google or get 1 Super Bowl every 10 years, let alone 18 every year. These are hardly losses that California can afford to keep bleeding. On the contrary, the San Isidro Smart Border Coalition believes that efforts such as implementing enhanced driver's license are the types of remedies we cannot afford not to take. Now, permit me to give you just a little bit of insight, particularly on the San Isidro, more personal feel, if you will. In San Isidro, we have 700 businesses surrounding the border in a community of 40,000 people. That's almost 1 job-providing, tax-paying business for every 55 people living in San Isidro. Despite the recession, perceived violence to the south, the Department of Homeland Security virtually doing everything to thwart prosperity. We're continuing to do this. Being on the border, and in large part due to the positive influence from our friends and neighbors from Mexico, the Las Americas Premium Outlets in San Isidro, California is one of the highest performing retail centers in the country. Not outlet centers, retail centers in general. This single center provides over 1,000 full-time equivalent jobs, and next year the San Isidro Chamber of Commerce will be hosting a job fair to fill another 600 to 800 jobs due to the expansions at the extremities of this center. Also in San Isidro, as a result of the recession, the Bazaar at Border Station popped up, offering over 50 mom-and-pop businesses the opportunity to provide 200 jobs in our community. These are just a couple of examples of the opportunities we have due to California's proximity to Mexico, our neighbors, our friends, our family members. Gentlemen, I guarantee you, if we had a 20 to 30-minute border crossing wait time any day, any hour, there's not a model in existence that could predict the growth and development California, the great state of California, would be afforded. Again, the San Isidro Smart Border Coalition believes highly in your discussion today, and this discussion and your subsequent actions are not only the right thing to do, but a major step in the right direction to ensuring the cure of California's financial woes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Having a 20-minute goal is a good goal to have. We'll now hear from the Mexican perspective on this subject. Today we're very pleased to have Juan Tintos today. He's been hand-selected by the governor of Baja and asked to be here today to speak on this issue. Mr. Juan Tintos Funke is representing the state of Baja California and is the Secretary of Tourism. He will be giving us a better understanding of the impacts of the impacts border wait times represent to the Mexican economy. Thank you for being here, Secretary Tintos. And we have about 10 minutes allocated for your presentation. And as I mentioned, we also have Normando Novello Bonifaz. And if you can...
Listo?
Yes.
We're ready. Thank you. Good afternoon, gentlemen. On behalf of the Governor of the State of Baja California, Jose Guadalupe Osuna Millan, who sends his best regards, I'd like to start by thanking all of the members of the Select Committee on California-Mexico Binational Affairs and congratulate Chairman Assemblymember Ben Hueso on his first year under the coordination of the Select Committee. We truly appreciate this opportunity of being a part of this important meeting. As the Assemblyman mentioned, I am accompanied today by Mr. Normando Novello, an outstanding businessman from Baja California and president of the Tourism Office in the port of Ensenada, Baja California. As many of you already know, the relationship between California and Mexico is quite important in several fields: science and technology, education, geothermal, solar and renewable energy, telecommunications, just to mention a few. But one example probably stands out more. Mexico is the third commercial partner of California, but of all the products that Mexico exports to California, Baja California alone contributes with 68% of it. That means we are truly trading partners. This relationship between our two neighboring states has been a long-lasting and profitable to both sides of the border, and I underline both sides of the border. It has been reflected in several work tables, public and private organizations, as well as many forums, summits, and various projects, such as the U.S.-Mexico Border Governors Conference or the Border Legislative Conference, which is very well represented today by our friend Edgar Ruiz, the California-Baja California Border Crossing Committee, as well as many academic institutions, among many others, and always having the support of great allies, including the San Isidro Chamber of Commerce, and allies also as the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, the San Diego Association of Governments, SANDEC, and even the mayor of San Diego, the Honorable Jerry Sanders, among others. Let me share with you some of these examples.
A little-known fact is how linked Baja and California are. Sage, business-minded individuals have known this for many years.
As we find out that it becomes more difficult to manufacture in California, that Baja provides an alternative for near sourcing of manufacturing and creating some of the innovation that we need right here in San Diego. Rather than manufacturing in the Far East or in Asia, manufacturing in Baja provides a very cost-effective way for companies here to get their markets, their products to market.
We also share business, and our two economies really thrive on each other. And without those two economies working together, neither one of us would be as successful as we have been as engines for our specific countries.
San Diegans in general really don't appreciate the extent of the interrelationship and the interdependence, and don't really recognize how important Tijuana's economy is and how big and robust and productive a city it is.
However, in recent years, due to a combination of factors, including a perception of insecurity towards Mexico, long waits to cross the border in both ways, as well as an impacted economy, especially in the U.S., the flow of tourists to Baja California decreased from 40 to 60%, depending on the related activity, from 2006 to 2009. As a result of these factors, also, Baja California residents have also reduced their spending in California, mainly in shopping and leisure activities on this side of the border. Fortunately, some of these issues have been already addressed. For example, through the U.S.-Mexico Border Governors Conference, the California-Baja California Border Crossing Master Plan was implemented, and currently the San Isidro-El Chaparral border crossing is under construction, as well as the expansion of the Calexico-Mexicali border crossing between the governments of both countries. We are talking about a joint investment of over $550 million. With the Sentry Lane program, as well as the Ready Lane program, these options, we have gained a lot of ground. In order to address the perception of our state, we formed the Baja California Image Committee, through which American residents in Baja California, the so-called expats, have supported us in a campaign with testimonials to help us spread the word through the media and about the better conditions and the safety for tourists in Baja California. The following are just some examples of those expats.
We're considered the best destination spa in the world. Barbara Streisand's been here. Kim Novak was here dozens of times. Oprah was here 5 times.
Sometimes people have a tendency to put one country into the perspective of all areas of that particular country.
I've been coming to Baja for 30 years. I love coming down here and racing. I've never really had an issue down here. We've come down. You come down here, you treat Baja, you treat the people with respect, and you won't have issues. I mean, they'll endure you and bring you into their houses. And I love the Baja.
We read newspapers. We go out to wine and cheese with our friends at night. But we're saying that it is portrayed that Americans are coming to Mexico, and specifically to Baja, and are being injured or involved in some unfortunate circumstance. And that's not the truth.
We have also promoted the film industry and the visit of world-famous actors to our film studios in Rosarito Beach, where Titanic, Master and Commander, and other films were produced. We have coordinated many events, such as Tijuana Innovadora, where we were honored with the visit of former Vice President Al Gore. And we continue to hold our traditional off-road races like the Baja 1000, or have internationally renowned celebrities like Sylvester Stallone, Kevin James, and other actors, or even the visit more recently of well-renowned American chefs Rick Bayless, and more recently, as of today, Anthony Bourdain. Distinguished Assembly members of this committee, Baja California and California are one single economic region with an interdependence of thousands of jobs that can either be created or lost, as well as millions of dollars that can either be generated or equally lost. It all depends if we work together. According to the San Diego Association of Governments, SANDAG, the inadequate infrastructure capacity at the border crossings between San Diego County and Baja California have created traffic congestions and delays for cross-border personal trips and freight movements that are costing the U.S. and Mexican economies an estimated $7.2 billion in foreign gross, as well as the loss of around 62,000 jobs annually. Dear Assembly members, it's very simple. The improvement of Baja California's economy, especially in the tourism activity, with more Californians visiting our state, enjoying our events, our beaches, our great cuisine, our wine route, or even for health services, that will be reflected in a healthy Baja California economy, and that will be more people from Baja California coming back as consumers to shop in department stores or visit amusement parks from San Isidro north to Los Angeles and even to San Francisco to visit friends and relatives as tourists. It means dollars coming back across the border into California's economy. This has been and will be a natural behavior in our border region. These are just some of the reasons why we respectfully request your support in the implementation of the so-called enhanced driver's license as a valid document for quickly authenticating the applicant's U.S. citizenship, to identify and state residence, and as a measure to alleviate the border waits and simplify the crossing between Baja California and California. In finishing my participation, I would also like to add that the tourism providers of services in Baja California have agreed that if it were to take place, they would recognize the enhanced driver's license in over 680 businesses in Baja California, from hotels and restaurants, that would be offering 10 to 50% discounts to all who would go and visit Baja California. As Governor Osuna recently stated at the groundbreaking of the San Isidro border crossing, let us build more bridges that will unite us instead of walls that will divide us. Again, I thank you for the opportunity of addressing you, and we hope to see you in Baja California very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that wonderful presentation. And we have another presentation coming up next. But before we invite our second group, I'd like to ask the committee members if they have any questions to our panel of our panel. Okay. Okay. We can also postpone the questions till after the second presentation. Thank you very much. Oh, you do? Okay.
I did want to really thank our panelists to come and speaking about a very real problem that has existed for many years at the border. And as you said, there's some projects, construction projects, trying to facilitate the expedited crossings for not only goods but also of people, and it's very important. And I think you guys made a compelling case. Not only that the history of the state of California and Baja are intertwined or interlinked for hundreds of years, but also that there's a big loss to not only the economy of California but also Baja. And so it's a win-win when we could seek real solutions for this really defined problem that you've presented here today. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about the technology that could perhaps be incorporated to expedite and address this problem. One of our committee hearings was on the border, and we're able to cross and be able to see the long lines of traffic, which also is a factor for some of the goals that we've set here in the state legislature of trying to reduce greenhouse gases. When you have parked cars that are idly sitting for hours just trying to cross the checkpoint, it really undermines that goal that we have in the state. But also you saw the long lines. They looked like it was about a 2-hour wait just trying to have people who are crossing on foot through the border. So we're able to see it's a big need for the thousands of people down in your region, and I'm glad that you're able to come up here. I represent the Salinas Valley and the Monterey Bay Area, so I'm not privy to the everyday observations that you experience, but certainly understand how big the problem is, and certainly want to be helpful and hopefully trying to address something that's a win for both countries.
Mr. Chair, if I could request just a brief comment from Mr. Normando Novello from Ensenada.
Sure.
Regarding this topic.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for everyone hosting us today here in Sacramento. I would just like to say that it is an honor to be here, and that on behalf of the Baja California tourism business community, we wholeheartedly support the implementation of the enhanced driver's license. And this is because, according to recent reports that we have, in California, about 40% of the population have passports. That leaves 60% without a passport. And we believe that that 60%, out of that 60%, mainly that don't have passports are the ones that used to freely travel to Baja California because there was no need before 2001 to have any type of document. Now, they are mostly we believe middle and lower income households. So in establishing the enhanced driver's license in California would provide the citizens of California an instrument that is not as expensive as the passport, which is $135, and you can multiply that by, for example, a family of 4 adults, that is $500 before you leave in order to come back. So establishing the enhanced driver's license would provide an instrument that they can be identified while visiting either Baja California or traveling by sea or even crossing back from Canada in a very more affordable way. So what this does is helps to increase the flow of persons from California to Baja California. And then the businesses that we represent in Baja California, most of our supplies we buy in San Diego. Everything I'm wearing, I bought in San Diego, for example. So that's the truth. So
that's America's, right?
In San Isidro.
So in most of the hotel industry supplies, everything, sheets, bedspreads, everything we buy in San Diego. So if this flow is working, then it's a win-win. And the other big advantage for the California user is in the states that we've seen it established, it's an optional. It's not obligatory. In New York, you can opt for that, and then when returning with the ready lines now in place, what I'm sure the people next to me know all about it expedites the flow of all of these American citizens that would have that option in California drivers. So we thank you very much for this opportunity to be able to express that sentiment here. Thank you.
One question on the figure of a 40 to 60% reduction in tourism into Mexico. How much of that is because of the perception of the security situation, or because border wait times are very long?
I would say it's one of the main factors would be traditionally it has been the border waits, the infrastructure, and the lack that there used to be of different ways of facilitating the border crossing. That's why we mentioned that the sentry lanes and the ready lanes are contributing, but there is still a great deal of people that we think would consider this as a great option, and it would give great value to an official ID or document of the state of California. We have had our problems with the aspect of our image and our perception, especially from 2006 to 2008, 2009. But as you saw in our presentation, we have had major movie productions, major movie stars, chefs, different people starting to come back to Baja California. And I think this would be a great measure that will help us to bring even more people. And as Mr. Novello mentions, and generate a win-win situation. It's inevitable. Our housewives will never stop coming across the border for shopping in Southern California.
And Mr. Chair, if I may add just two things. As you know, I actually lived in Playas of Tijuana for about 14 years. I can tell you Tijuana, Baja California, is safer today than it was 10 years ago. And I think that we've done, between those videos that the Secretary showed, people like myself, I think we've done a decent job. We need to do more as far as that perception of violence. But I can tell you, statistically, in a reality sense, the wait times have caused and are causing much more damage than any perception. I would venture to, even as far as a recession goes, the wait times have done more. And when you ask about the trips, even the tourism to Baja, we have to keep in mind, and you know, one of the things like the Assembly Member Alejo had mentioned, being kind of up here, not really seeing the day-to-day. When we're talking about a trip, it's not just one trip for one purpose. When someone's going to Baja, they may fill up their gas, in California, producing sales tax in California. They may get the clothing that they need on that trip in California, and of course, vice versa. One thing that we've seen over this holiday season is our sale numbers were actually up a little bit, which I think is a sign of the reception, but the number of clients, our visits, were way down. So what's happening is, before, where there were 5 people on a street in Tijuana that would each come up and shop and produce sales taxes in California, etc., now those 5 families have gotten together and they're sending one person. So he's buying more, but our counts are down. Well, what that does is, that's 4 less families that were coming and having a cheeseburger while they were shopping. 4 less people that were filling their cars up with gasoline. 4 less people that happened to, I don't know, they went to go to the movies because they got their shopping done. So there's a domino effect on these losses, aside from the numbers we're giving.
Assemblymember Lara.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that presentation. I would urge you to, as you continue to work on your imaging problem and outreach, that we do it in LA as well. There's a huge portion of the population, obviously, in my neck of the woods that used to travel, myself included, to Tijuana and have family in Tijuana.
Yep.
And I think this is a very innovative way of really bringing back the image of Tijuana. My question is, or of Baja, I should say. My question to you is, now, is there any work being done in terms of the Tijuana airport as a destination for Californians to use it as a point of either exit to Mexico and to other points of the region? And have there been any talks about maybe developing that area in terms of a crossing between California and Baja?
There are 2 important projects regarding the airport. First, I would like to share with you, Tijuana's International Airport, depending on the season of the year, is between the 4th and busiest airport in Mexico, with around 155 flights a day. But after Mexico City, Tijuana's International Airport is the best commuted airport to the rest of Mexico. That means a lot of people flying into Tijuana, with a lot of them in their minds of the purpose of crossing for going to the restaurants, for shopping, or the amusement parks in Southern California. One of the main reasons why domestic tourism in Mexico has gone up, but especially in Baja California, is because of that geographical location. A lot of people that come here. The international airport currently is undergoing an expansion and remodeling of around 375 million pesos. That would be around $34 million, which will be truly a new airport. There's also the other project of a binational crossing right in front of the international airport. I don't know if you'd like to share more information on that project, which has been registering certain progress in recent weeks.
So I'd say 15, 17 years ago, the South County Economic Development Corporation, which is in Chula Vista, California, started this idea, and it started as twin airports, and because of security and everything else. What it is now, and has gotten the presidential approval, and is actually underway, and actually the chairman was a great help in getting this project going, is a cross-border commuter terminal. Passengers with tickets can drive up to Otay Mesa, where I showed on the map. You basically drive, I-5 south to the 905. You park across the border from the airport in Tijuana. You show your ticket. You go through whatever screening, and then you have a bridge. The concept has people movers on it, et cetera, but you have a bridge where you literally have your exclusive crossing over the border right into the wing at the Tijuana International Airport. And obviously that's on the return as well.
Maybe they could make use of some of those tunnels that they excavated underground and save some money. Anyway.
We don't say tunnels, Mr. Chairman.
Assemblymember Perez.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I actually was going to wait to say a few words, but I actually have to catch a flight very soon. So I just wanted to make sure I just mentioned a few items, at least at the top of my head. First and foremost, I appreciate your presentation. I think that the conversation that we're having here obviously is long overdue. I don't represent the San Diego San Isidro area, but the 8th Assembly District means, for me, at least the Imperial County and the Mexicali region. And, I remember the days growing up as a kid, and even up until perhaps 10 years ago, where we can cross the border just walking, right? And we could cross back from Mexicali to Calexico in maybe under 15, 20 minutes. Nowadays, walking, it takes about an hour to an hour and a half. A vehicle takes about 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours, and depending on the time of day, depending on the day, obviously we're definitely impacted. And the economy is definitely impacted. And I really appreciate the numbers that you provided, the billions of dollars that we're losing as a result of the wait times and as well the jobs that we're losing. And so our President Barack Obama, in his State of the State speech, did mention some notes about and some thoughts about comprehensive immigration reform. He touched upon it when it dealt with our students, but I think that it's important that we also understand that when we talk about comprehensive immigration reform, that we also talk about the economy. The fact of the matter is that long wait times does have an impact on the economy and does have an impact on jobs on both sides of the border. And if we're talking about comprehensive immigration reform, I think it's important that we also talk about it from the aspect of ensuring that we build up infrastructure on both sides of the border. Because if we're able to do that, then we're able to create jobs on both sides of the border. And what that means as well, we can also curtail illegal immigration, right? And many times we don't think about it in that aspect, in the aspect of comprehensive immigration reform for the economy and for jobs. And so I definitely appreciate the thought about the enhanced driver's license because I like to participate in that program. But I also think it's important that we modernize our infrastructure along the border, whether it is the airports, right, or whether it is ensuring that we have more lanes for vehicles, or even for that matter, other issues such as waterways. We have polluted rivers that flow from Mexico to the United States. And so I'd like for you to take a look at a piece of legislation that I am introducing, and it's AB 1545, which is also known as the Binational Economic Development Bank, in which would utilize NADBank, the North American Development Bank, as well as the California Infrastructure Bank, to facilitate a process in which we can bring about resources in the form of loan guarantees or bonds or private capital to build out infrastructure along the border. And this would be a bi-national approach in which infrastructure can be built, infrastructure projects could be built around a 120-mile radius of the border. And that would require, obviously, folks from Mexico, diputados, if you will, from Mexico, as well as those of us here from California and the federal government to really do everything we can to modernize the infrastructure that's necessary so that we can alleviate the border wait times and at the same time ensure that the economy continues to flourish on both sides of the border. And so we need to really look at this as a binational approach, a bi-regional approach. And so I just wanted to make those statements because I'm definitely going to be looking for individuals like yourselves to support this piece of legislation. And Mr. Chair, thank you for bringing this conversation here today. Very, very important. I have to fly back to Coachella and actually go visit Imperial County. So, in any event, thank you, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly Member. We're going to get to our second panel. Thank you for being here. We're going to move on to our second panel to discuss the enhanced driver's license that was mentioned earlier. Our first speaker is Edgar Ruiz, Director of the Council of State Governments West region, a regional public, nonprofit, and nonpartisan legislative organization serving the 13 western states of the United States and serving as a community liaison to Customs and Border Protection. Welcome, Edgar. Are you getting set up there? You have 10 minutes for your presentation. And following Edgar, we're going to have Ms. Mimi Khan with the California Department of Motor Vehicles. And Mimi has served with the DMV for more than 10 years. As Mr. Reese sets up. And when you're ready to begin, sir, we'll... Looks like we have it all sorted out.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, for the opportunity to address the committee on the topic of enhanced driver's license. I also want to take the time, Mr. Chairman, to thank you and the members for your leadership to further strengthen the U.S.-Mexico relationship, and particularly the Baja California relationship, which is obviously a very important one along the U.S.-Mexico border. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the enhanced driver's license. I will focus my presentation on providing you a brief overview of the history of enhanced driver's license, the benefits, as well as some privacy issues. And I know Mimi Khan from the Department of Motor Vehicles will discuss a little more on the business aspects of the issuance of those driver's license, as well as the what other states are doing. The history, briefly, the In 2004, based on the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission, Congress passed the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, which established the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative. And it's aimed at strengthening border security by preventing the utilization of false documents and to facilitate entry into the United States for both legitimate U.S. citizens and foreign visitors. WHTI requires that all citizens of the United States, Mexico, and Canada, Mexico, and Bermuda have a passport or other accepted document that establishes the bearer's identity and nationality to enter or depart the United States from within the Western Hemisphere. Prior to WHTI, land ports of entry in Canada, U.S., and as well as Mexico could enter the United States on an oral declaration or by presenting numerous documents to show identity. However, the Department of Homeland Security deemed that many of those were easily counterfeitable. After a lengthy discussion, public comment period on WHTI, it became implemented fully in 2009 at land and seaports of entry, and basically creating one single document option for all U.S. and Canadian travelers. Some of those, this single document option, and I apologize for the size of the font here, but those were U.S. and Canadian passports, U.S. passport cards, trusted traveler cards such as the Nexus, the Sentry, and FAST, which are these are both applied both in the northern border as well as southern border. The state or provincial EDLs, which obviously we'll talk about, but also includes enhanced tribal cards, U.S. military ID with orders, U.S. merchant mariner documents, Form I-872 American Indian card, and as well as the Indian and Northern Affairs of Canada card were considered all as part of the single document option. The requirements for non-U.S. citizens and Canadian citizens were in place prior to WHTI and remain unchanged. Those were obviously that includes the passport and visas and the permanent resident cards, as well as border crossing cards. The benefits, and here I'll break it down to three classes, I think, or three areas: the travelers, the state, and to the federal government, in this case, Customs and Border Protection. For travelers, an EDL would be convenient, affordable, and flexible option to meet the tougher federal document requirements because it serves both as a driver's license and as a border crossing card. So it eliminates the need to carry multiple identification documents. EDLs are ideal for day travelers and vacationers as they are the size of a traditional driver's license and can be carried in a wallet, and unlike the more cumbersome passports. Travelers will also experience less delay as they move through the primary inspection process more quickly. Also, the cost. The cost for an EDL, it ranges from state to state, but for example, in Michigan, EDLs cost $45 and enhanced state identification cards cost $30. Both are received fairly quickly within 2 to 3 weeks, whereas passports are more expensive and can cost more, over $100 in some cases. The application process for EDLs are easier as well. Those who already have a driver's license need only to present proof of a valid Social Security number and U.S. citizenship in addition to their driver's license. For states, it promotes a seamless trade and tourism between states and the neighboring country. In this case, obviously, California and Mexico. As such, it allows states to meet requirements of the federal requirements under WHTI while protecting their economic interests. Mexico is the U.S. Second largest export market and third largest trading partner. Trade reaching over $400 billion in 2010, more than quadrupled, is expected to quadruple more in 20 years. This increased trade and consequent closer relation among the people of our three nations have made all three countries more competitive in a global marketplace. As was mentioned by the earlier speakers, in 2007, Sandag and Caltrans conducted a study aimed at estimating the economic impacts border wait times along the San Diego, Baja California region. And as I mentioned before, the loss that is estimated is in the $72 billion on foregone gross output and more than 62,000 jobs in 1 year alone. One interesting characteristic about the SANDAC study is that the study concluded that added wait times also discouraged personal trips across the border in San Isidro, Otay Mesa, and Tecate port of entries. More than 60 million northbound crossings at San Diego, Tijuana. Out of the 60 million crossings that are found in a year, more than half of these trips were shopping and recreation. Another 10 million of those trips were made for work and business. And more than 90% of those were basic cross-border trips that were local. So as you can see, there is a large pool of folks just in the San Diego region alone that would potentially benefit from having EDLs. For Customs and Border Protection, obviously it would facilitate more seamless inspection because it would DHS can validate the EDL in real time with issuing authority when a traveler presents it at the port of entry. CBP estimates that the RFID technology saves between 8 to 10 seconds per person, as the card does not even have to be handled by the agent. And also the CBP officer can focus on the inspection as well. And finally, it's a trusted document issued by a trusted source. Some of the technology, and I'll be brief on this, is basically the document is machine readable with radio frequency identification and a machine readable zone. Basically, a vicinity radio frequency identification chip that will signal a secure system to pull up biometric data for the CBP officer as they approach the border inspection booth. And it also has security features in the document to prevent counterfeit, as well as data sharing points between the state or province and CBP for real-time validation. Privacy, only a number on the RFID chip. No personal identification information is stored in the tag, according to the Department of Homeland Security. The personal identification information is stored in secure databases that's transmitted over secured networks. It includes an attenuated sleeve issued with all RFID-enabled travel documents. Basically, they cannot be read if they are in their sleeve. The presentation of a photo to CBP officer from a secure database reduces the risk of clone tags being used successfully at land ports of entry, and the implementation of tag identifier by issuing authorities will eliminate the successful use of clone tags. Now, obviously, this technology does not come without its critics, and some concerns that have been expressed by groups like the ACLU include that basically there are no technological protections included in the RFID chip to keep personal information from being read without the individual's knowledge or consent, that there's security researchers that have built devices that can be read and cloned RFID tag on an EDL. As such, there's nothing to stop someone from building similar readers to make counterfeit enhanced driver's license or engage in identity theft or improperly track monitor of the activities. Also, the issue that EDLs lack basic security that is deployed in some of the U.S. passports. And some of that distinctions include the following. On a passport, a random identification number is generated each time the RFID is read, whereas in an EDL, you have the same identification number used each time RFID tag is read. On a passport, data embedded in the RFID tag is encrypted, while on an EDL, it's transmitted without encryption. Also, passports contain metal threads to block RFID data transmission when passports is completely closed. And as mentioned earlier, the EDL does not include a built-in shielding security, but obviously, although the protective shield sleeves will be distributed with the new cards, there's a concern that people misunderstand the importance of placing the EDL in a sleeve and remembering to do so. So those are some of the concerns, obviously, that are expressed regarding EDLs. However, at this point, based on the states that have adopted EDLs, there have been no case that or instance of fraud or that they've been maliciously used. Groups like the Border Legislative Conference, as well as other binational groups like the Border Governors Conference, have expressed that utilizing innovative approaches like the EDLs would basically support the idea of enhancing the border, making it more secure, faster, and smarter for the 21st century. Washington was one of those first states that enacted EDLs, and in fact, that was very much a state-driven process through groups like the Pacific Northwest Economic Development Region and their counterparts in British Columbia. In fact, the impetus of this was the Olympic Games of 2010 in Vancouver, and the idea of making it easier for U.S. citizens that were going to go to the games. But obviously now you have a whole host of different states that are now using this or promoting this along the northern border. At this point, none of the border states have yet enacted EDLs, but there's a very healthy discussions in almost all of them as to the use of this technology. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm open to any questions that you may have.
Very thorough presentation. Thank you. But before we go to questions, we're going to ask Ms. Mimi Khan with the DMV to come forward and make her presentation. I really want to thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members. First, I want to thank you for inviting me today to speak on the important EDL issue, Enhanced Driver's License. I have prepared a short PowerPoint presentation, and in your pamphlets on the right-hand side, I've also supplied you a hard copy if you'd like to follow along. As far as an overview of the EDL, the Enhanced Driver's License, I'll be covering a couple of areas. One that Mr. Ruiz has covered in detail, which is what is an EDL, who issues them and where, what's the process for implementing the EDL should we choose to go through, and then what are some of the issues that are changes that would be required with the Department of Motor Vehicles in California. So essentially, an EDL is a driver's license, an enhanced driver's license that is issued by the states that denotes identity and U.S. citizenship. But it also possesses a RFID chip, and it meets all of the requirements that were discussed earlier of WITI, the initiative that was passed by the federal government. The issuing states right now, there's about 4 of them. And let me see if I can remember to click here for you guys. There. So Washington, they have a total population of driver's license of 6 million. To date, I believe they started issuing, they were the first state, and they started issuing in 2008. They average about 4% of their DL licenses per year. And then I also have New York, Michigan, and Vermont. New York being the largest one with 12 million, they average about 5% of the intake. Michigan is at 8%, as well as Vermont. Of note is that although, with due respect to New York, which is quite large at 12 million, we sit at 24 million as far as our driver's licenses in California. As far as documents that are issued that have the RFID chip, we've talked about there's almost 12 million. In addition to the passport, which was also discussed, there is the individual states' enhanced driver's license that right now 4 states issue, and the Department of State issues several others, as well as Customs and Border Protection. So there's a variety of different agencies that will issue this card that allows for an RFID chip and hopefully faster movement throughout the lanes. So what is the EDL process that a state would have to go through in order to have or qualify for an EDL? First, there would have to be a memorandum of understanding, which is a commitment at the state level and the U.S. Customs and Border Protection level, and that that commitment would have to be signed off at the governor level as well as at the commissioner level. There would then be the administrative aspect of it, which would be a business plan. The business plan would outline in detail all of what we call the WIDI requirements that kind of take off from the Real ID requirements in the area of issuance, in the area of security, in the area of technology standards, and so on and so forth. That would then be signed off by also the state as well as the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency. Then you have the information technology agreements between the state and CBP as well, because as we'll discuss later, there are significant technology issues that have to be considered. Once that's done, then then everything is published in the Federal Register, and for example, if it was California, then California's license would be considered an EDL and compliant with all the WIDI requirements. So let's take a moment to talk about some of the significant issues that California would face in becoming WIDI compliant. One is that it would require legislative authority, which is a good reason why we're discussing this before this committee, to issue EDLs that would have an RFID chip. In 2010, our budget subcommittee instructed the department not to implement RFID chips into our driver's license card without specific explicit approval. Currently, our vendor, who is L1 Identity Solutions, is the vendor who, with several other states. So that would make it more convenient, but we would still have to amend the contract, make some modifications to the texture of the card, the layout, putting in the chip, of course, etc. And of course, there's an additional cost factor with the RFID cost element for an enhanced driver's license versus a regular driver's license. That'd have to be negotiated with them. It varies in states between, I think, $2 to $4 or something like that, in addition to their normal price. It would depend on how many different changes we'd have to make, our card stock, if they'd have to redesign it. So, okay. Then there's a citizen requirement. Right now, California, as you know, has a legal presence requirement, but that is the U.S. citizenship is a higher standard than that. So we would need authority to designate the U.S. citizenship on the EDL card. It actually has a U.S. flag on the card which says you are a U.S. citizen and therefore have an enhanced driver's license. So that is something that the driver's license so far has not. The legislature tells us what we can have, the name, the address, and so on and so forth. So we would be adding that, a citizenship designation on our driver's license card or the EDL card.
So what happens to the permanent residents in terms of permanent residents with the green card who would like to apply for such a driver's license?
They would not be able to have an enhanced driver's license. This is only for U.S. citizens. That's a significant issue.
It is.
They would also need to develop an electronic verification system for birth documents, at least in California. The goal is overall that they could verify all birth certificates, and passports and other documents. Given that we don't have that capability nationwide, we would at least have to do it within California. And right now, the DHS does have the capacity to verify passports, so they would want us to implement that program as well. And then there's federal connectivities issues with our DMV database. I think Mr. Ruiz talked about when you go through to the crossing the border that they would check your card through the RFID chip. So we would have to have authorization, or we'd have to authorize DHS access into to California's EDL database. That could be done through one of two ways, from what my understanding is. One would be that once you apply for an EDL driver's license, and we would send that data over to DHS, and then they would maintain it. The second is what is called the ping system, that when that person crosses the border at that point, it wouldn't go to DHS for verification. It would hit the California database. We would then send the record over through the code and the RFID chip that was discussed, and then that would then become part of DHS's record. DHS also requires that we develop an electronic notification to DHS. So if an EDL is lost or stolen, then we need to develop a process where that would then be immediately communicated to us, and then it would be our responsibility to immediately electronically notify DHS so they could then block that record. Then there's also a requirement of verification of address. California currently does not verify address. We would have to develop connectivity with the U.S. Postal Service. We work with the U.S. Postal Service right now, but that is after the envelope is mailed, and then we go through and sort it. This would have to be prior to at the time that you're working with a technician, so that we could verify if there's an address or not. It's not the best, but it's the best that's out there right now. We'd also require the customers to bring in 2 pieces of documentation that has been mailed to their residence, such as a SMUD or their some sort of other government type document. Those 2 documents would then be reviewed by the DMV technicians, scanned and stored for, I believe it's 10 years. DHS also requires that interviews be done with all EDL applicants, so that when you would come in for an application for an EDL, if it was a DL, then you go stand in line and provide the documents. But what they would like to see, in order to try to assure that the documents are valid, and they go through a special training with our technicians, or we would have to do that, is there'd be anywhere from a 10 to 15-minute interview with the person talking about the documents and trying to kind of an investigative type interview, so they can try to discern if it's valid or not. The requirement right now in the business plan is that if you're going to do the interview, which would be one of the DMV employees, that they could only be a U.S. citizen, that a legal resident would not be able to do that. So we would have to start verifying the U.S. citizenship of the employees that would actually conduct the interviews, or have to set up a process where the supervisor is a citizen and they would have to review the work product before it is processed. Now, I chose not to speak about some of the minor issues or those that we're already in compliance with. So the ones that I've addressed today are the issues that at this point we'd have to implement in order to, if we were to become an EDL state. So essentially, in conclusion, we need legislative authority would be needed, as we've discussed, for a variety of issues. The privacy issues that I did not discuss, but Mr. Ruiz discussed, as far as the ACLU and others have felt concerned as far as the chip, and our budget subcommittee, who has asked us not to implement that unless we have, full legislative approval. There'd be the technology issues that we've talked about as far as having to connect our database, which also are some privacy issues with the federal government, and either giving them that information or allowing them access to that. And then, of course, there'd be additional personnel and resources needed in order to implement this project. So with that, unless there's any questions, I thank the panel very much, committee.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. And in the cases of Washington, New York, and Michigan and Vermont, the states that have already implemented this program, they're following these same guidelines that you presented?
Yes, they are.
Okay. It's interesting to me that New York would have such a high subscription rate, given that they're not located next to or within the proximity of a international border. Any guesses why places like Washington or New York would be interested in implementing these
well,
these
Washington
programs?
is close to the Canadian border.
Washington, D.C.?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. The state of...
Oh, it's the state of Washington. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was thinking Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And New York?
New York, I did talk to New York, but I didn't get any input. I didn't ask the question as far as why their numbers were high.
And given that we're next to a border like Mexico, and if we were to take the modest 8% subscription rate, that would put us nearly at 2 million licenses, if you assume, given our population. Is that something that would require, in terms of processing, the kind of financial infrastructure that you need if it's employed statewide?
We'd have to have the infrastructure regardless of the numbers. And then as far as the quantity, then that would make a difference as far as, staffing up and where you would staff up. But the technology as far as the infrastructure and the verification systems would be the same.
And could cost recovery of the program be worked into the price of administering the license? When somebody applies, we can include the fee, an administrative fee.
That would be one thing that the committee, would consider. Definitely, it would have to be a cost over what we currently charge. Every state has charged an additional fee for the EDL, at least the four states that we have. So there would be an additional fee, I would think. Whether or not that would cover the infrastructure, the states have told me, with the exception of Washington, who charges the least, they charge $15, and so they're not recouping their costs right now. But that it tends to cover the ongoing costs, but they did not include the infrastructure cost.
Which is a one-time startup cost.
Yes.
Okay.
In California, that would be a lot.
Thank you. You have questions, Mr. Allen?
So for the states that you identified that have already implemented programs, from the time that it was legislatively enacted, how long did it take to actually get full implementation?
Oh, none of them are at full implementation at this point.
None?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, if you mean, let me clarify it.
Yeah.
As far as going through all of the people that have licenses in that state, it's kind of a day forward volunteer.
No, but at least getting the program started.
Yes, they're all started.
And how long did it take, though, from the time that the legislation was passed, enabling legislation?
It varies. I believe, no, I don't think I can speak to that because I don't know when they started. Okay. So some of the implementation was shorter than
I'd be curious. The other thing is that mention was made of the privacy concerns. So is that an ongoing process that those states are dealing with, trying to satisfy those privacy concerns? As it's implemented, are more things cropping up that need to be kind of identified and fixed with the programs? I'm just curious.
Yeah, we'd probably discuss it with them. My guess is that their privacy concerns were probably dealt with at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mr. Alejo.
So just so we get a range and idea of what this costs to somebody wanting to get an enhanced driver's license, you said Washington State is $15. What about these other states? Is it under $50 on all these states?
Well, I believe New York is the highest. They charge $60 for their regular driver's license and $90 for an enhanced driver's license, and the license is good for 8 years.
8 years?
Yes.
Okay. And then, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I had some information here. Washington's was $15 more than the standard driver's license. Vermont was $25 more than the standard driver's license. New York, $30 more, and Michigan, $20 more. The only thing that's not here is the base or the cost, but at least it gives you the additional cost.
And that's my next question. What is the infrastructure needs? What does that look like in terms of infrastructure?
We
costs?
have not costed those out.
Well, what would it be? Cost for what?
What would the items be?
Right.
Most of the items that we discussed earlier, that infrastructure would be very significant as far as connecting with DHS. It would be the personnel to do the interviews. Based on the other states, they said their interviews take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. So that would be times, however many customers. The verification systems as far as the birth and then the address verification system and then the passport verification.
Okay, excellent. And then I was just trying to also, because a big question on any of these is like the security measures, and so if this policy idea were to move forward, that's one of the big questions. What are the security measures and as they're crossing? And if you could just kind of explain why this process is also faster. What makes using this card faster than using other documents? Would it be an expedited lane? Because they still have to show the cards like we're seeing in some of these documents here, and then still having to show another document of verification to the person verifying the documents at the checkpoint. So if you could just explain to me in practical terms how has this become much faster?
Well, it would become much faster if at the port of entry there is what's called ready lanes, which are already used in most ports of entry for folks that have passport cards, or like the Sentry, which is for frequent travelers. Obviously, that would be, I would suggest for the state, if it pursues that option, is to work with CBP so that they also add additional ready lanes than what they currently have, because that's going to be key in order to expedite the travel for individuals that have this. But basically, what's faster is because using this technology, they can basically pull it out, and it's a electronic reader, and for the CBP agent, they're able to, that information is then in their front of their computer, and they're able to see the data and the picture and information. So that's what makes it a little much quicker than a standard process. But again, I would, obviously, if the state pursues that, I would encourage the state to work with CBP to add more ready lanes, particularly San Isidro Port of Entry and others.
And explain the security component. How, if I have one of those, what's the security to check if I'm not just giving my card to somebody else and somebody else using that card to enter? So if 5 people are in a car, how is it quicker? All of them taking out their card, and then the person there at the point of entry being able to verify each person's individual identity.
What's a little more? That's a question that's probably out of my jurisdiction. I mean, that's a CVP question that can answer the specific details of the technology. But I would suspect that it would work no different than, say, what individuals use for Sentry passes, where with the Sentry, the vehicle's registered, I believe,
yes,
and the individual, and only that in the Sentry program, only the individual is to be in that car. They cannot have other passengers in that car. So I would assume, again, I don't want to speak for the Customs and Border Protection, but I would assume that they would use a similar type of process. And obviously, again, using a dedicated lane for EDLs.
So and the key element is having the photo on the screen before the people even come to the booth, so they can be compared to the photo on his computer screen.
Yeah. But I'm wondering if there's 5 people in a car, it's going to take time to kind of screen through the 5 different photos and the different information, so it kind of slows down the process. And I'm just trying to understand, why does that become faster? The Sentry already exists, and obviously it's not the most, it's not the most ideal model. Otherwise, we wouldn't be discussing this. And I'm just trying to find what's the difference between Sentry versus the enhanced driver's license, and how, in practical terms, does it become quicker when there's still a lot of verification that needs to happen that will, in a vehicle of 5 people, will take quite some time.
Correct. Not everybody. The thing is, I think not everybody that has a passport has a Sentry card. I think it's yet another tool for the state to offer, or in this case, the state to offer another tool for individuals that obviously are frequent commuters, and obviously having the same technology and security features that does a passport and others based on the requirements that are required by the federal government.
Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, thank you to Mr. Ruiz and Ms. Khan for your input here today. It's important for us to take these steps to get us to where we want to be, and that's increasing the fluidity at our borders crossing, undoubtedly, whether it's the movement of goods or whether it's a movement of people wanting to enjoy tourism. We want to promote that and increase it, get it back to the levels we were and beyond. That's, I think, the ultimate hope. So thank you so much for working to come up with some hypotheticals and potential. Kind of on the strand that Assemblymember Alejo was alluding to with regards to why it would be faster, my question would be, speaking on that same strand, and the question would be this. What is the estimate, the guess as to how much faster? Do you think it would be a 10% efficiency or improvement? Is it 20%? And that would be my question to all of you. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if we're putting in infrastructure, right, we're taking those steps to burden all of you and the state and the legislature to move in this direction. At the end of the day, there has to be a public value. So what's our guesstimate in terms of time reduction?
And I'd also like to ask Jason Wells with the Smart Border Coalition to come forward and chime in on some of these questions so you can.
The estimate provided by CVP is that anywhere between 8 to 10 or 15 seconds quicker. But obviously, when you look at a border crossing like San Isidro, where you have potentially 2-hour wait times, that 15 seconds per vehicle or per person obviously accumulates in border wait times. And maybe, Jason, you want to?
Yeah, running a chamber there, I know more about this than I want to know. But in answer to several of the questions, here's the difference. Now, you can't confuse Sentry or the FAST with what we're talking about, these ready lanes. Sentry, you go through a background check. It's an FBI background check, as if I don't know if you get one as an assembly member, but if you go to work for a federal government or so forth. So there's a full background check that they do. This does not have a background check. This is quite simply adding your passport and your driver's license together. All it's establishing is that you're a U.S. citizen. Okay. The chip is what enables this to be a faster red document, which is, you asked about the resident aliens. Their cards already have a chip. So as far as expeditious crossing at the border, they really don't need an enhanced driver's license. Their card already does this. With some interference here. Now, what makes this faster? What makes this faster is that currently, because of the WITI laws, if I, as an American citizen, want to cross and I don't have a passport, let's say I pull out my driver's license, then I also have to show, as you alluded to, a birth certificate. Well, birth certificates are not machinably read. Also, the current California driver's license are not readable by CBP because they don't have access to the same databases. So if I get my driver's license, he still has to type in, the agent, he or she, still has to type in that information. If I have a birth certificate, they have to ascertain that paper document is a real document, which there's, I think, 5,000 different types of birth certificates right now.
And that's the key point.
Right.
Having to enter information into the database.
When you come up, if you have a car with 5 people, those 5 people's photos are on the screen that the agent is looking at. So that's what makes that faster.
Without having to manually.
Right. You swipe it, it's red, it comes up on the screen. Usually by the time your car gets to the agent, he's already looking at your photo, which, as Edgar mentioned, that makes the fact that they're not manipulable, or I forget the term, but that you can't manufacture these, all that much more important, because the agent then is trusting, okay, I see the photo, that's you in the photo, they're trusting that document is real, which is why the tamper-proof is so important in those.
I just thought that there's also lessons to be learned for the states that are utilizing already. From before they used the technology till now, I mean, they're able to measure, how it's improved on the border crossings there. And so I think in future hearings, that information I think would be helpful to assure other legislators that are not privy to this conversation to address those concerns, as I know they will be forthcoming.
And I can tell you anecdotally, CBP, and we meet with them. I probably have 3-4 meetings a month with CBP. They have a 15 to 20 minute or 15-minute not guarantee, but a 15-minute goal for Sentry users. Okay, there's a 15-minute wait time goal for Sentry users. So the Sentry lines they try to keep at 15 minutes. The normal lines, an hour and a half, 2 hours. So what they try to do is make sure that the ready lanes then are somewhere between. Usually half that of the regular lanes, but it's never going to be faster than Sentry by design because again, Sentry you've had that background check.
And on those ready lanes, only travelers where the RFID document can go on those lanes. So, which obviously would reduce some of the wait times. And in the Washington, I think Assemblymember Allen had a question on the Washington program. My understanding of the Washington program, it took about 2 years after the enabling legislation was enacted.
One more thing quickly. You don't necessarily need Ready Lane is obviously the fastest, most expeditious way to use these RFID cards. But even in general lanes, if every other card has one, that's every other card that they're not having to type in information. So even in general lanes, there is a benefit to the border crossing times of those people in those lanes. Obviously, it's more beneficial to have them as designated ready lanes. But again,
and if they're traveling from Washington or New York or the states that already employ this and happen to have a card, it's going to help us at any border crossing.
Correct.
So tourists that have this card will.
Yeah, my understanding is because the passport side of this equation is a national measure, then it should be used at any port of entry.
And then the passport card.
Yes.
If we employ this, let's say in a phased-in approach, where not every DMV office would have either the staff or the ability to process these applications, but you would have them in maybe regional or by county or by population. Is that a way to reduce the cost?
I guess we'd have to look at the workload and where it is. So if there would be no workload being generated, let's say in Reading, then the fact that we didn't establish something there, then you're probably right. On the other hand, if we establish 5 offices and then all of the customers come to those offices, then the workload would continue to be at a higher level. So, we really have to take the time, take a look at it, spread it out. Again, the infrastructure costs would be fixed, and the only cost that we could manipulate would be the staffing in offices, et cetera. I think 2 of the states originally started off saying, no, we're only going to do the offices closer to the border. But New York and the other states, once they looked at it, they said it really makes sense just to do it all. So California would have to look at it as well.
Okay. Mr. Allen?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that maybe at some future time the information could be supplied to the chair so we could have it regarding those states that have started their programs, how it has been quantified, whether it's in hours saved, people hours, or however it's been quantified, because I think a lot of times when we do get questions from our colleagues, going to want to know, well, is this really worth doing? And so we need that information.
Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you very much. We'll conclude our questions, and I just want to make some closing comments that as somebody who visits the border, I think this technology would make a big difference. And I think as far as the security checkpoint operations, this could lead to a much easier process to identify American citizens as they cross the border. So I think we still have some information to request, and I really want to appreciate you coming in to give us kind of an understanding of what we need to do to accomplish this, because the first step is really knowing in what direction we want to move and whether we're going to move in that direction for the interest of addressing this issue. This may not be a comprehensive solution, to all problems having to do with border wait times, but given our inability at coming up with the type of resources that we need for a comprehensive solution, every little bit is going to make a big contribution. And something like this, well, may have a significant cost. It might also have a significant benefit to the quality of lives of the people that travel from Mexico to California and California to Canada. I don't think Northern California is too far away from the Canadian border. But nonetheless, again, we're going to continue to offer you up some more questions in the future as we move forward on this. I really want to thank you for all the work that you've done to prepare for this, because I know this information wasn't served to you on a platter. I know you had to go and look for this, and we'd really appreciate anything else you could do for us to make sure that if we do decide to do this, that we do it right, and that we don't put you in a very tenuous situation in terms of trying to implement this in the future. So thank you for that. And again, I'd want to thank everybody in the committee. I know most of the assembly members are traveling, and I know you guys have far to go today. I want to also thank the Speaker, John Perez, the Mexican Consulate in Sacramento, the Carlos Gonzalez Gutierrez, thank you for being here, all our panelists, and all the people of our community that joined us today in this important discussion. We're going to continue to look to strengthen and develop economic policies that improve our relationship with Mexico at all levels. And I look forward to our next meeting that's currently or tentatively scheduled for March. We'll let you know all the details of that next meeting when we have them. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll leave this with you and your staff. I have a copy of the memorandum of agreement between Washington and CVP, which I think may be helpful, as well as information on the Washington program. They actually won an Innovations Award back in 2009 for their EDL, and I think has pretty good substantive information that you might want to look at, including some of the startup costs for the state.
Okay, and our last piece of business. Do we have anybody from the community that would like to add a public comment? Because we do have an opportunity on our agenda for public comment. And if you would come forward,
forget the public.
Yeah, we can't. And this meeting's for them. If you can state your name and give us your comment, we're going to limit time to about 2 minutes.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you for opening the public comment period. Yolanda Benson, and I'm here representing Freight Shuttle International. And although this was really a discussion about moving people, I've had the privilege of actually sitting on the Governor Border Conference, working with the 7 work tables. I was actually a part of creating that master infrastructure plan that was presented today. So these issues are very, very, very personal to me, and I've worked on them many, many times. I actually was involved with the economic impact wait times that was presented by Sandag and Caltrans back in 2006. So getting this new information was very, very helpful. So thank you, Chair Wesso, for doing that. We talked a lot about reducing greenhouse gases, ensuring public safety, and finding new ways to enhance how people cross the border in the port of entries from Mexico specifically to California. We've definitely seen today that they are a #1 trading partner, but we can't do that unless we free up lanes and we free up the time of CBP. And Freight Shuttle is a transportation system that is all privately funded. We are working right now in El Paso. We are building a system. What it is, it's a system that's linear induction, steel on steel. It moves goods, and it moves, and it can be 16 feet above, and it only takes 4.5 feet on the ground. We are fully privately funded. We don't ask for any money from the federal government or from the state. I will make sure to drop off information because today was not the time to do that, but maybe there is a time to present you what the technology is. We are building right now from Juarez to El Paso. We could actually go further. We are in discussions with Monterrey, Nuevo León, all the way to the border of Texas. We have 3 contracts in Texas right now with over 350 miles that we are building and taking goods off the road, making sure that we're dealing with the environmental impacts of greenhouse gas. This is absolutely no greenhouse gas. It's a carbon-free way to move goods. So as you have other meetings, this is just an introduction of what Freight Shuttle International can be. We are right now working in Texas, and we are working here in California. It's a little bit different working here in California, but we are in discussions working with the ports, but we certainly can't forget the other area of great activity, and that is our border. And I just wanted to present that to you today and hope that in the future we will have a time to present you a more full discussion about what this technology can do and what we can do to provide solutions for California and for the border.
Thank you. We'd like to incorporate that into maybe our discussions in the future. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Sigfrido Pineda. I'm in charge of international relations for the state of Baja California. And if I understood correctly, Mr. Allen, about getting some data on how this has been working in the different states that already use it, I just would like to point out that there is no comparison whatsoever between the borders of the U.S. borders with Canada than what we face in our borders. So to take them very in their own reality, social and economic and everyday crossings separately. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else wishing to make a comment? Okay, thank you very much. And I guess this concludes our meeting. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming. And again, we'll get everybody details about our March meeting. Thank you very much and have a very nice day. Thank you.